evolution by becoming a programmer. Not just a programmer, but a good programmer. Our speaker today is going to demystify becoming a better programmer for the next 60 minutes, giving us lots of practical ideas we can immediately put to work when you're back in the office on Monday. A programmer, an author, a speaker. He's probably responsible for introducing Ruby to the world outside of Japan and helped popularize both Ruby on Rails and later Elixir with a series of best-selling books. He is one of the creators of the Manifesto for Agile Software Development, and 15 years later gave the somewhat infamous Agile is Dead talk, viewed over 1 million times. He says, and I quote, "I am not an Elixir programmer, and neither are you." Before I introduce you to him, we will require you to kindly mute your mic and turn off your video to avoid unnecessary interruption during the session. Kindly note that the session will be recorded so as to upload it on YouTube for those who are unfortunately not able to make it here today. Please help me welcome the outstanding, phenomenal Dev Thomas.
Welcome, Dev. In Kenya or in Swahili, we say karibu. Thank you so much for accepting to be a part of us. Just take it over from here.
Well, I have to say, excuse me, thank you very much for inviting me. This is a first for me, and I am really looking forward to it. I have to say before I start that if you watch any of my talks that are recorded, you will know that when I talk, I walk back and forth across the stage constantly. I cannot stop myself. So having to sit in a chair and talk is actually quite hard for me. I'm going to try very hard not to go wandering off, but if I do, just shout at me. The other thing is, I would very much like to, I'm going to try and keep this fairly short, so we'll have time for some discussion at the end. However, my headphones appear not to be working, which means that it's going to be kind of hard for me to hear some of you. So if I kind of like stumble a bit trying to listen to you, I apologize in advance. Anyway, greetings from just north of Dallas in Texas, where amazingly to me, you guys are on the equator there, and we're up here in Texas. It's actually hotter here at, 5:30 in the morning than it is there at the moment. I have no idea why, but anyway. So what I want to do is a kind of discussion that I've been having for many years now. This is kind of like an evolutionary talk. And that's because basically what I'm doing is evolutionary. I'm evolving. I want to talk about how I'm becoming a programmer. And notice I'm not saying how to become a programmer. I'm not telling you how to be a programmer, because honestly, I don't know how you should be a programmer. Every person is different, and everybody's approach and everybody's needs are different. So I can't tell you what works for you. All I can do is tell you what works for me. And I think that's really important, because a lot of times you hear experts and they will say, oh, do this, do that. And what that really means is that one time on some project somewhere, I did something and it worked. And therefore, that must work for everybody. And obviously, that's not true. It's always contextual. So take what I'm saying here in that spirit. I'm not going to be saying, do this. I'm going to be saying, think about this. Maybe this could work for you too. So I have three things I'd like to talk about. Well, actually, no. I have three things that kind of drive what I'm doing, thinking about it. I have, first of all, in my career, in my life, I would like to be happy, which kind of doesn't seem unreasonable, really. we happen to be living in a very interesting time at the moment. But in software development, we actually have the opportunity to do some really cool things. And I think it's hard enough, it's difficult enough to do it, that it's actually worthwhile trying to make it happy. Because if you're not, then you're doing some very, very difficult work for no real reward apart from just the money. So I would very much like to be happy in what I do. I also want to develop, and here I don't just mean develop code, I mean I want to develop myself. Right? I want to get better at what I do. I want to learn new things. I want to experience new things. And so I want to make sure that during my career, I develop. And then I guess the ambitious one is I want to change the world. And I'm not talking about like, some massive, massive revolution. What I'm talking about is small incremental changes that say, yes, I was here, right? I want to leave a legacy. So for the next, I don't know, half hour or so, I just want to go through that list in a bit more depth and describe the kind of things that I'm doing to make that work. So we just finished writing the 20th anniversary edition of The Pragmatic Programmer. So the original book came out in effectively the year 2000. And so 20 years on, we have 2020, 20th anniversary. It's a lot of 20s in there. So we went through and we substantially revised Pragmatic Programmer and added a whole bunch of new content. And part of the new content was to do with stuff in this talk. I wanted to talk about, things that make being a programmer special. And as a result, the very, very first tip in the book is called It's Your Life. And it's about the control that you have and about the way you can actually take control of that life as a developer. And I think one of the more important tips there is you have agency. Now, what that means is that you are in control. You actually get to choose. Many careers are part of some big industrial kind of hierarchy where really your position is fixed and you're going to be doing this, and then someone else tells you to do something else, you have to go and do it. In software development, that's not true. Software development is one of those careers where you are valuable, and as a result, you get more choice than you may think. And one of the things I think to understand is that that choice is challenging. If you want to take that choice, then you actually have to make a decision for yourself. I am going to want to do this or that, right? I'm going to refuse to do that because I don't think it's right. I'm going to do this instead. All of these things are choices that you make. And those choices affect how happy you are, how satisfied you are, how fulfilled you are. So the very first thing I want you to remember is that you actually do have that control. And I want you to think about situations that you're in and how you want to exercise that to make your life better and to make other people's lives better. I think happiness comes from meeting goals. And I think you should be able to do that in this industry. Then I want to talk about how I develop. And again, I don't want to sit there and say, this is how you have to do it. So, excuse me, I'm going to turn the air conditioning off just a second. All right. So, I guess the first question is why? Why is it so important that I develop myself? Why do I need to keep changing? Why do I need to keep doing new things? Well, partly that's kind of built into me. I'm one of those people who has to do new things all the time. I'm just like, I really like that. But I think it's important. I think it's important for everybody to be doing that. And as usual, I'll go out and I'll find random quotes that back up what I want to say. So here's 3 quotes I came across, which I think kind of express what I want to say. The first one: in this world, you're either dying or growing. So get in motion and grow. That's from Lou Holtz, who was a football coach. You can kind of tell he's a football coach. But the point is that the opposite of growth is not standing still. The opposite of growth is diminishing. And nobody really wants to do that. Norman Mailer said, every moment of one's existence is growing into more or retreating into less. Same kind of sentiment. That growth is really the natural phase. We have to be doing it. We have to be growing all the time. And then Einstein. Who can argue with Einstein? The only source of knowledge is experience. And I think this is a fantastic quote. So let me ask you something. In your work today, in your life today, when you learn something about something every day, something like cooking or bicycles or playing a musical instrument, when you learn that, and once you've mastered, say you know how to bake bread or whatever it might be, how long does that stay useful? How long will that experience that you've gained be useful to you? Well, I would say the rest of your life. Most of these things are something where you can learn them and then you know them. If you know how to change a tire on your bicycle, well, that's not going to change probably over the next 10 years or 20 years. It'll still be the same. Same with an instrument. Someone from hundreds of years ago could walk up to one of today's pianos and probably play it. So these kind of technologies, if you like, don't change very much. And therefore, you can kind of afford to say, oh yeah, I know how to bake bread. That's not a problem. So let's just change that question around a bit. How long does something that you know about, I don't care, pick a technology, JavaScript or Rails or Phoenix or anything else, any of these software development technologies that we're using, how long does that knowledge stay relevant, stay useful? And I think across the entire industry, the answer to that is on average about 5 years. In some things, something like JavaScript, the answer is probably 6 months because it's changing so fast, moving so fast. You've got to be thinking very hard about this because really the thing here is a very scary situation to be in. You've put all this effort, all of this time into learning one thing, and that thing is only going to last for 6 months before you have to go learn something else. So for all of these reasons, it is really, really important to grow, to keep learning new things. Because if you don't, then the world will pass you by. Industry will pass you by. And basically, at that point, you become a maintenance programmer because the only technologies you use are yesterday's technologies. So that's the scary part. I guess the real question then is how? How do I go about learning? How do I go about growing? How do I go about getting new things into my head? And I've actually done a lot of reading about this. It's really interesting to research how the human brain learns. And it actually comes back to Einstein and Einstein's quote here. the only source of knowledge is experience. But what does that mean? What does that mean? Because, I mean, I would have thought Wikipedia is a source of knowledge, right? I mean, why do I say the only source of knowledge is experience? Well, to do that, we have to understand what experience actually means. And it's really hard to pin down. But the definition that I'm using, my working definition, is that experience is knowledge that you don't have to remember. Experience is when you've taken something, some situation, and brought it into your head in such a way that you no longer have to think about it consciously to make use of it. It's become, well, I'm calling it tacit knowledge, knowledge that's in there that you don't explicitly know about. And that sounds all magical and everything, a bit scary. So let's give you an example. And if my sound was working a bit better, I would do this interactively, but it's not. So I want you to imagine this, okay? I wanted you to tell me how to tie my shoes. I want you to do it with your hands flat on the desktop. And I want you to do it without looking at your feet. Now, tell me how to tie your shoes. What would you say? If I had to guess, I would say that what you are doing right now is imagining tying your shoes. You may even have your eyes closed, because what you're doing is looking at your hands in your imagination as they tie your shoes. And by doing that, you could possibly describe how to do it. You can't necessarily just say, oh, you do this and this and this and this, because it's kind of like something you do without thinking about it. An even more extreme example of that. How do you catch a ball? Someone throws a ball. How do you move to catch it? Well, I'll tell you one thing. You are not solving differential equations in your consciousness as the ball is coming towards you. You're not sitting there plotting the movement of all of the muscles it takes, the big muscles in your arms and your legs and the small muscles in your fingers. You're not moving those deliberately to catch that ball. You just find that your hand kind of just automatically goes up and closes around the ball. How do you do that? You're certainly not thinking about it. In fact, if you think about it, the chances are very good you'll drop the ball. How do you find a bug? Well, sometimes you can give me a path, a way of doing it. But the reality is, most of the time, you do it using gut feeling, instinct. Now, at this point, you may be saying, wait a minute, I'm a software developer. I am an engineer, right? I am a professional. I don't work using instinct and gut feelings. I work using logic. I work using facts. And I'm here to tell you, you don't. That most of the decisions you make every minute of every day are not conscious decisions. And most of the clever part of your brain, you cannot actually reach. If you imagine your brain is divided into many layers, right? Down the bottom, we have the layer that's basically totally automatic and it controls, the nervous system. It controls your breathing and everything else through your nervous system. And that's just there. On top of that, we have another layer, which is below consciousness. And in fact, that is the biggest layer in terms of processing in your brain. That's the layer that's handling things like catching balls and riding bicycles. And then on top of that, we have what we like to think of as our brain. And that's our conscious layer. But the reality is that conscious layer is really not too much more than a user interface over the rest. And most of the real work, most of the looking things up and saying, oh, this is relevant, this isn't relevant, all that kind of stuff is taking place below the level of consciousness. And there's an interesting little experiment we can do just to prove that. Imagine you're developing, you're coding away, and at some point during the day, you come across a bug. Say it's just before lunchtime. So you come across a bug and you can't find it. You're late to lunch because you still cannot find this bug. But you keep looking, you keep looking. Well, no, all afternoon, you're looking for this bug, you can't find it, you can't find it. You stay late because you're looking for this bug. You're not going to get this, but have this bug beat you. But no, you still cannot find that bug. You go home and you are miserable because part of your brain is still sitting there saying, I gotta find that bug, I gotta find that bug. When you go to bed at night, you're still thinking about this bug and you find it hard to get to sleep. But eventually you fall asleep. And the next morning you wake up and you know exactly where the bug is. When I do this talk in front of an audience, I'll say, how many people have had that experience? Everybody raises their hands. It's all done below the level of consciousness. And so that is how we're going to learn. There's only one way to learn things, and that is by doing things. We're going to do things, and then most important of all, we're going to make mistakes. Because if we never make mistakes, we never learn. So we're going to do things, we're going to accept the fact we make mistakes, we're going to enjoy the fact that we make mistakes. Because every time we make a mistake, we can say to ourselves, great, I've learned something now. But that only works if you understand why, if you understand what went wrong, or at least make a start understanding it. That's a feedback step. So to learn something, you do it. You don't read about it. You don't talk about it with other people, although that's useful. You do it. And you do it over and over and over again. There is there was a thing in the 1970s called inner sport. And the idea was that you could help people learn how to play a sport using exactly this technique. And I saw a documentary on television about it. And what I saw was a coach teaching somebody how to serve the ball in tennis. Okay, so in tennis, you throw the ball up, you hit it with a racket, and it's supposed to go into the square on the other side of the net. And the coach took someone who really was a very beginner in the game and said, okay, this is what we're going to do. And they put a chair on the other side of the net, just somewhere in the middle of the court. And he came out with a big, big basket of tennis balls. And the coach said, okay, I want you to hit the ball over the net, but I don't want you to aim for the chair. I just want you to hit the ball anywhere you want. But every time that ball lands, I want you to say it was to the left of the chair or to the right of the chair, in front of the chair or behind the chair. And the person then just hit hundreds of tennis balls over the net. And every time they hit the ball, it would bounce on the other side. And they would say, behind and to the right, behind and to the left, in front and to the left. And they would just keep doing that over and over again. And at some point, the coach would say to them, okay, now I want you to hit the chair. And the person would hit the chair with every single shot. What they'd been doing for the previous hour was basically giving themselves feedback. And although they weren't consciously aware of this, down in that little subconscious part, their brain was actually learning from that feedback. And interestingly, it works best if you have that feedback out loud, if you actually say the words, because you're engaging more of your brain, first of all, in forming the words, and then in listening to those words come back at you. So repetition is how you learn, and feedback is what makes that learning stick. So repetition is key here. Now, when you first start doing something, you don't know what you're doing. If I said, hey, let's all go jump out of an airplane using parachutes. Yeah, let's do it. Well, if you're in that airplane, wearing your parachute, looking down at the ground below you, you do not want to be told all the theory of parachuting. You don't want to go into fluid dynamics and airflow and all this kind of stuff. No, you're a beginner. You want to know, what thing do I pull and when do I pull it? That's all you care about. You're a beginner and you want rules. So when you're just starting anything, don't sit there and try and make the whole thing up yourself. Look for people who will give you, well, not even people, look for tools that guide you. It is perfectly okay to copy. Stack Overflow is a great tool when you're a beginner. It's also a lousy tool because it's full of really bad code, but that doesn't matter, because part of the thing you're going to be doing is thinking very hard about the code that you're using. I've been writing programs now for, I don't know, 40 years, getting on for 50. And I still go, and if I'm looking up something, I can quite happily go on the web and find someone's code and then copy it. And what I find is I'll take their code and I'll copy it, and then I will be making changes because it doesn't quite do what I want. And typically, by the time I've finished, none of the original code is there. It's all my code. But along the way, I've learned a whole bunch of stuff about how things could be. I've also learned how things shouldn't be, because I've been giving myself feedback as I go through that process. It doesn't matter if you copy when you start, as long as you do it intelligently, as long as you are critical of the code that you're using. You fall into trouble where you copy code and then don't understand what it does, because then you don't know why your program works. So when you're starting out, it's perfectly okay to follow some rules and to copy and do all the other kind of things that gain you experience. But as you grow, what you have to start to do is to trust your instincts more. Because remember, that's the entire point. The entire definition, if you like, of learning is making something into an instinct so that you know how to apply it. So you need to start learning to trust your instincts. Listen to that little voice in your head. I'm sure it's happened to everybody. You're sitting there and you're working away and you have this feeling that something's not right, that your code isn't right or the design isn't right or whatever it is. You need to learn to listen to that little voice, because that little voice is the voice of experience, your experience that's talking to you. It's really interesting because your subconscious doesn't have a voice. It cannot speak to you directly, right? It can't sort of like wave a flag inside your head and say, hey, Dave, that's wrong. So it has to use more primitive ways to talk to you. That's why when maybe you're walking down a street and it's a bit dangerous and you don't know why, but you start to feel uneasy. Maybe you get that sort of feeling in your stomach, or you start like, you get a bit chilly or something like that. That's because that's how your subconscious can get your attention. It's the only way it can do it. It's very primitive. And so you need to learn to listen to that, because once you listen to it, then you'll start being able to use all of that experience that you've gained. Obviously, as you get more experienced, you can take on bigger and bigger challenges. And that's really important, because if you don't take on a bigger challenge, then eventually you're going to stop learning. And always, 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 you need feedback. Without feedback, then you're just, heading off randomly in some direction. Feedback is what gives you the retention. You're going to get better and better and better. And as you get better, then the other great way of learning something is to teach it to other people. I have been programming, like I say, for a long time, and I love sitting down with people and working with them, pair programming with them or whatever. Not because, I feel like, oh, great, I can show off, I can say things. It's because every time I do it, I guarantee I will learn something. One of the great things about being a beginner is that you don't know the right way to do things. And so you'll do things, in some particular way, and it may well be that you stumble across a better way than people who've been doing it, forever, and they always do it the same way. And so I always learn something when I teach other people. It's a fantastic way to learn. You need to be getting more critical of yourself. You'll find that as you learn and as you get more experience, you also get to be able to kind of split your head into two parts. The part that's doing it, and then a part that's watching you do it. And try and develop that. Try and develop that kind of self-critical role. Because really, at the end of the day, you are the person that you're trying to please with this. At some point, you're going to become a wizard. You're going to know all of this stuff. You're going to become comfortable. And you may think, yay, I've achieved it. I'm done. I'm a success. Well, I think no, because here's the interesting thing. Once you reach that point, go and find something new to become a beginner in. And you might say, Dave, why do I want to do that? Why do I want to? I put all of this work into learning, I don't know, some JavaScript framework, and you want me to throw it away and go do something else? No, you're not going to throw it away. You're going to keep developing it. You're going to keep using it. You're going to keep learning from it. But as you get more and more and more experienced, the stuff you're learning is getting more and more specific. Think about it. In the first day of learning something new, you go from nothing to being able to, maybe you can just run a hello world example or something. But in that first day, you've gone from nothing to something. That's a really, really big step. And every day from there, you're making really big, big steps. Maybe at the end of the week, you've got some basic app working, whatever it might be. That's a massive step. Then you keep going. Well, you're still learning stuff, but the effect of that is smaller and smaller. You're fine-tuning, right? It's no longer the big leaps. It's lots of small little adjustments. So if you want to maximize the amount you're learning, then the trick is to be a beginner in as many things as you can. Now, when I'm talking about doing this, I'm not obviously saying that, you're in a work environment, whatever else, you're not going to throw away all of that experience and stop working on your projects so you can go and learn something new. But what I'm saying is, when you see opportunities to do things in areas where you don't know anything, grab them. Those are the most valuable opportunities you have. Look around for things where you say, I wonder how that works, and find out. Because that constant learning is how we grow. And more to the point, in a kind of commercial way, that's how we pay tomorrow's bills. Because those are the skills that will be useful to us in the next 2 years. So I told you, I'm not going to tell you how to do things, but I am going to tell you how I do things. So I have a very simple plan about how I learn things. The first thing is that learning new things is my responsibility. I don't know how it is where you are, but in the States, A lot of developers will say to me, my company doesn't teach me this stuff. And I say, it's not their job to teach you that stuff. Because what you're doing is you're investing in yourself. You're making yourself into a better developer, into a better human being. That's not their responsibility, that's yours. And so when we're learning, we're saying, I want to do this in my own time, my way. It's an investment in yourself. I have something I call the rule of three, and that's to try and manage what I learn. The problem I've got is that we're in an industry that changes so quickly that you can't learn everything new. So what I do is I will keep my eye out for things that look interesting, but I won't immediately jump onto them. I'll wait to see if I have seen 3 references over the space of 1 or 2 weeks. So if I see a particular thing come up and then it comes up again and it comes up again, at that point, I'll say, oh, I should probably go read about it. Because if I don't do that, if I wait for something, if something comes along and it looks interesting and I immediately drop everything I'm doing and go and start researching it on the web, I get nothing done. I'm constantly following these links on the web. So the rule of 3 keeps me sane and stops me thrashing around in Google. When I do research, it's getting actually quite hard to do real research on the web because there are so many ignorant people telling you this is what this means and this is what that means. So you have to find for yourself sources that you trust. And that source may not be Google. It might be a local user group, people where you trust you trust that they know what they're doing and that will help you learn new stuff. Don't necessarily rely on Stack Overflow or the web to learn new things. Research wisely. And like I say, constantly be a novice. Because being a novice is where all the fun is, to be honest with you. I also have a thing set up in my calendar. So twice a year, typically just in January and sometime around about now, actually, it just pops up a single word in my calendar. And that word is comfortable with a question mark. And it's designed to make me stop and think, have I got too comfortable? Have I settled into a rut? Am I just doing the same thing all the time? Because if I have, then that is my cue to stop and to go do something else. So that's my plan for learning. Yours would be different. The only thing I'd say is it's important that you have one. It's important for your sanity. It's important for your future. And it's fun. So first 2 goals were be happy and to develop. And my last goal is change the world. Why not? While we're at it, let's change the world. Well, the reality is we are changing the world. I mean, think about the fact, I'm sitting here in Texas. You are spread all over the world, and we're sitting here interacting. We couldn't have done this even 10 years ago. And the only reason we can do it is software. Developers, millions of developers, have put together the infrastructure and the tools to let us do this. We are changing the world. There's a book, hang on a second, let me see if I can find it. Yeah. There's a book called The Mythical Man Month. I just happen to have my copy here. And Mythical Man Month was written in the 1970s by a guy called Fred Brooks. And he was a project manager at IBM, bringing out a brand new operating system for IBM, which you'd imagine was a pretty big job. And The reason for the title is that he discovered effectively the beginnings of agility, that the number of people that you put in a team has nothing to do with the productivity of that team. That putting more people onto a project doesn't make it go quicker. And that's why he calls it the mythical man month, because it used to be that you'd say, oh, this project will take 50 man months. And therefore, if I have 25 people, it will take 2 months. And that's not true. Anyway, at the beginning of this book, Brooks is dealing with an audience. This is 1975 or 6 or something. A lot of people don't really know what programmers do. So he's describing the joy of programming. And he has a list of 5 things that make programming joyful. The joy of making things that are useful for other people, solving puzzles, the joy of always learning. There you go. And then the last one is the one I want to read. And I'm actually going to read a paragraph to you just because it's a really important paragraph. And it goes like this. Finally, there is delight in working in such a practical medium. The programmer, like the poet, works only slightly removed from pure thought stuff. He builds his castles in the air from air, creating by exertion of the imagination. Yet the program construct, unlike the poet's, is real in the sense that it moves and works, producing visible outputs separate from the construct itself. It prints results, draws pictures, produces sounds, moves arms. The magic of myth and legend has come true in our time. One types the correct incantation on a keyboard, and a display screen comes to life, showing things that never were nor could be. Building with thought stuff is what we do, which is incredibly cool. Basically, if you can imagine it, you can make it. Now, that is both a privilege and a big responsibility, because we can make things that solve incredible problems. We can make things that cause incredible problems. And we don't always know which is which. Think about Twitter. I mean, when Twitter first came along, right, you can send, well, at the time, it was 144 character messages randomly out into the world, right? Seems like a waste of time. I'm sure the people who created Twitter never imagined that they could help start revolutions, or that they could instigate hate crimes. There's consequences of what we do are phenomenal. So I started off with the very first chapter in The Pragmatic Programmer about you having agency. And we're going to finish off with the last 3 tips from the book, all in the last chapter, which is the fact that you have agency also means you have responsibilities. And there are 3 tips in this chapter. First, do no harm. This is the part of the Hippocratic Oath that doctors take, and we should as well. Be very careful. Don't let the fun part of software totally take away your idea of right and wrong. Right? Just because something looks like a big, interesting challenge doesn't necessarily mean you should do it. Right? You have a responsibility. And that's related to the second tip. Don't enable scumbags, nasty people. Right? Don't fall into the trap of becoming a tool for bad people. But then I didn't want to end on a really down note, so the very last tip of the book. It's your life. We talked about that. You have agency. It's your life. Share it. Go out and show other people what you do. Help other people understand how amazing that world is. Celebrate it. Build it. Keep growing. And I always say this. This is the most amazing time and the most amazing industry. Have fun. change the world, and have a good time when you're doing it. Hey, I'm a software developer. I overran by a few minutes. I'm sorry. But we have some time. So do we want to discuss anything? Hello?
Yeah, thank you very much, Dave, for that. That was really insightful. So just to the audience, if anyone has any question over to Dave, you can feel free to unmute and ask the question. Are there any restrictions as to what they can ask?
Nope. I may not answer it, but they can ask anything they want.
All right, so just feel free to ask any question. One at a time, please.
Yeah, hi Dave.
Hi.
Yeah, good. Thanks for your time. My question is, how do you learn? Like, how do you learn new things? What's your approach to learning?
Okay, I'm sorry. It's the audio is really bad. Can you say that again?
How do you learn? How do you learn new things? What's your learning method?
Well, basically, I do what I said. I pick on something that I want to know about, and I then turn it around. I try to motivate what I want to learn by what I need. So quite often I'll be working on something, or I'll have a problem that I'm trying to solve, and I'll be looking around for solutions. And if this is not an area I'm very familiar with, then I'll go and I'll try and find something. And at that point, I'm into learning. So there was not long ago, I wanted to put some automation into our house. And so I had to learn all about Z-Wave and all this kind of technology. And so that was my opportunity. And so I went out and I bought a really cheap little bit of hardware and started programming it. And I didn't know what I was doing. And that was the great fun. So I had a need, and then I went out and I did exactly what I said in the talk. And that is, I started doing stuff and I started making mistakes, and then slowly getting through that experience, getting better and better, and actually learning more and more about it. So find something that interests you, something you have a need for, whatever, maybe it's a professional need, maybe it's a personal need, whatever it might be. Find something that you can actually motivate yourself with, and then go out, pick the technology, make the mistakes, and get better. And if you do that, the nice thing about it is, even if you'd never ever use it again, at least you've had some benefit from that knowledge, and that's always a nice idea.
All right. Thank you for that. I can read a question on Slido. We've shared a link on the chat. So if you're not comfortable unmuting and asking, you can just go and ask on here. You can be anonymous, or you can give us your name. So there's a question here. Do you think functional programming is good for beginner developers than object-oriented programming?
It depends what you mean by good for. So functional programming, first of all, functional programming is actually by far the more natural way of programming, because when we go through school, for example, we learn mathematics, and mathematics is all about thinking about things in terms of functions. Right? In mathematics, if you say A equals 1, you're not saying assign 1 to A. You're saying that A and 1 are equivalent. They have the same value. That's exactly what you're doing in functional programming. It's only when we get into the weird stuff of assignment and thinking about memory as little boxes and all that kind of stuff, that's where it gets unnatural. And that's where we have to start teaching people a whole new way of thinking, which is object-oriented development or procedural development. So I would say that in an ideal world, functional programming would be the first way you learn to program. The problem is that there aren't that many great functional programming tools out there for beginners. Typically, functional programming has become an academic discipline. And so it's been hard. I mean, Haskell and stuff. Haskell is a hard language to pick up simply because it's wrapped in so many obscure terms. And that's why I loved the rise of Elixir. I mean, Elixir is not a pure functional language, but it has many aspects of functional development. And I think that's been great because it's an accessible, approachable language, which also has many functional elements. So can you teach functional programming using Elixir to a new developer? Maybe. The only downside of it is that it's really server-side technology, which means that you don't get the immediate satisfaction you'd get than if you're writing, Python or JavaScript or something like that. I would love to see a world in which everybody was doing functional development. I don't know if that will happen.
All right, I would love to see that too. There's another question here. I noticed that you use the rule of 3. How do you take researching and picking up something before you pick up on something else? How do you learn multiple things? How long do you take? How long do you take while you're doing your research?
You have to be pragmatic. I personally cannot learn too many new things at the same time because I am not very good at keeping things in their own boxes, And so if I'm trying to learn, 3 or 4 things at the same time, they keep leaking into each other and interfering. Other people are great. They can learn, 20 things at the same time and not worry about it. It's an individual thing. So find your own limit there. But you got to keep saying to yourself, am I being productive doing this? Am I actually continuing to get something out of this? And so what you're doing is a trade-off. You're trading off the time and effort you're spending doing that learning against the return that you're getting. And you always have to keep monitoring that to make sure that you're kind of optimizing the use of your time. So I don't think there's any one answer, but I think if you were to draw a graph of it, you would find all of these kind of like overlapping curves of how much I'm getting involved in new things as I'm developing them.
To add on that, I have a question. This is Maureen Josephine. I'm a software developer. So I have a question on how you discipline yourself when learning something. Like if you're learning something new, do you dedicate like a specific week or a specific month so that you know how productive you become with that, or how do you do it? Because I think for me, discipline is a challenge when learning something new specifically.
Very, very good question, and you're absolutely right. And that works 2 ways. First of all, learning something new can be uncomfortable because you're forcing yourself to say, I don't know. And so sometimes you find yourself not doing it because you don't want to admit that you don't know. So in those circumstances, you have to find a way of motivating yourself to learn. The other side of the coin is, and I fall into this a lot, I really enjoy learning new stuff. And quite often I will find myself ignoring my real work because I'm having so much fun learning this new stuff. It's a really major trap is you fall into is you like the new stuff so much, you never get anything done because you're constantly playing with new things. So I don't know how you should discipline your time or organize your time. I'm not very good at it, to be honest with you. I tend to spend too long learning, and I'm aware of the fact I do that. And so what I have to do is I have to set myself deliverables. So typically I'm learning something because I need it for some project that I'm working on. And so I will say, whatever happens, I'm going to deliver this thing. I'm going to finish this thing by Friday. And then I will keep an eye on how I'm doing through the week. And if I'm spending too much time, quote, learning and making mistakes, then I'm going to have to pull back on that and actually deliver something that works. It's difficult. It really is difficult. And I think everybody's way of organizing is going to be different, which isn't much of an answer. I'm sorry, but I think you're exactly right. That is a problem. If your problem is the other way around, that you just never find time to learn, I think a useful thing is to do what many authors do, who say, I never have time to write. And what they do is they set aside some time during the day. A lot of authors seem to like getting up an hour early and writing then, because everything is quiet. It's a nice time of day, and they can just concentrate on that. So maybe you could get up a bit earlier, or maybe do it last thing at night, or whatever works for you over your lunchtime. I don't know, and set aside time to do it. But you're absolutely right. It's managing that process is just like managing everything else. You actually have to consciously plan for it.
All right, awesome. So you've just talked about how the authors do it, and that can transition to our next question about authoring books. I'm personally aware you've written so many books, and we actually used your book to get started with Elixir in the office. So there's a question concerning writing of technical books. So the question is, at what stage should you really feel like you're good to write a technical book? And how do you approach someone to review your book? Would you prefer self-publishing, or do you approach a publisher in that case?
So I always say to people when they say, oh, should I write a book? No, don't do it. It's 2 years of your life that you'll never get back. But that's just, I'm just being silly about that. I think there is really one reason, I think, that you decide to write a book. And that is that you want to learn about something. Now, you may think that you're an expert in something, but when you come to write a book, you'll discover that you're not. You'll discover there's a whole bunch of things that you don't know. And when you try to put things down on paper and you can't wave your arms and speak very quickly, you find you actually have to know all of the details. And so you're going to force yourself to learn. So personally, that's why I have written the books I've written, to help myself learn. I think there are few things that are as rewarding as seeing your words in a book. I know every single author that I've known, when their book is published, the first thing they'll do, at least in the old days when there were bookshops, is they will go down to a bookshop and actually see their book on a shelf. For a while, when I used to travel around the world, I couldn't help it. I would go into the bookshops in the different countries and see if I could find one of my books, because it's not just ego. It is just amazing to think that, the stuff that you've done has spread that much. So it really is a great, fun thing to do. It is also an incredible amount of work. Probably the average technical book, I would say, would take about 400 to 500 hours to create. So that's a pretty big time commitment. And then do you publish it yourself, or do you go to a publisher? I think it depends. I think if you have a reputation and if you have a following, then you can probably get away with publishing it yourself. Otherwise, the publisher brings the marketing to the book that you wouldn't otherwise have. This is going to sound like some self-promotion, but the Pragmatic Bookshelf, that's the company that Andy and I ran, will actually self-publish books. So you can go and actually self-publish the book and then go to the bookshelf and say, would you like to take this on as well? And you keep self-publishing it, and they will, if they accept it, they will then market it as well. So that's kind of the best of both worlds. The one thing I would say is that you're going to be more likely to finish the book if you start writing it with a publisher, because they will have people who are experienced in the process, and they will keep you going. They'll be like your coach and help you to keep going when things are hard and you're feeling like you'll never finish. So I would say if you want to write a book, do it. But you don't have to write a book. You can write articles on Medium. You can do screencasts. There's 100 other ways of getting your ideas out there. But if you want to write a book, good luck.
All right. Awesome. Do you have time for 2 more questions, Dave?
Absolutely. If you don't mind me just turning around, and I've got to fetch a cup of tea that's behind me. Hang on.
Okay.
Could I ask another question?
Please do.
Okay, so we were talking about books, and 2 main learnings are for me right now side projects and to read actual books. And I kind of struggle to get the right ratio between both, because when I actually work on a side project, I think, oh, today I didn't read any sides on that new book I actually would like to read. And then when I read the book, I think, oh no, I should actually work on my side project to learn. And I kind of struggle to get the ratio right where I read and where I actually program.
That's interesting. Yeah, I find that I have the same thing, and what I find is that I'll be reading the book, and then I will go, oh, that's really interesting, and I'll go and start coding it, and then I won't go back to the book. My solution to that is I keep a stack of technical books that I want to read next to my bed. And I cannot program lying down. I don't even keep a laptop next to my bed. So I can't be diverted off onto a computer if I read just before I go to sleep. And so I slowly read through my technical books chapter at a time in bed. And that's how I manage that process. But again, that's just my solution. Other people will have different ones.
Okay, there's another question on here. It's more of a self-evaluation or self-discipline. How do you really tell the difference between learning Kruger effect and having an imposter syndrome? Did you catch that?
Yes, I did. I'm just trying to think. I think most decent people constantly have imposter syndrome. The feeling that they are not up to a particular task, that they're not worthy of a particular task. And I think imposter syndrome is something you just have to learn to ignore. Yeah. It's just the way it is. People, if you're any good at all, then you know what you don't know, and you're constantly looking at that. So I would just say that you need to just recognize in yourself. And to be honest with you, this, I have been worried about this particular talk all week, just because it's a different way of doing things, and I had no idea how it would go. And I've learned a lot doing this, because I made many mistakes actually during the talk itself, and I've learned stuff to do. But I was very nervous coming into this, which is a form of imposter syndrome. You just have to learn to ignore it and get on, I think.
Yeah, you did well in hiding your nervousness, because we knew I personally didn't realize that you had it. There are a couple of more questions, but we won't have time for that. Sorry if your question was not answered. So Chantel, I don't know if you have anything.
Yeah, I do. Thank you, Dave, for an enlightening and entertaining session on becoming a better programmer. We appreciate having this mysterious area clarified. Your advice on the rule of three, which is be happy, develop, and change the world, was especially useful. The audience may not know this, Dave, but we owe you a special vote of thanks for being here. We really appreciate you taking your time and energy to grace this event. Once again, thank you.
No, I want to thank you because this has been a fantastic opportunity, and I will do this anytime you ask me.
We just overcame our imposter syndrome of not being sure that you'll accept to come for this.
No, the only thing I would ask is maybe next time we could do it in your evening, because I'm going to go back to bed now.
Yeah, I'm really sorry about that. Yeah, I'll just stop recording here.
Okay.